Hello students, in today's session we are going to discuss the geography questions of Civil Services Mains Examination 2022. And when you look at this general understanding of the geography questions of GS-1 this year that were asked, to be very precise, more number of repeated concepts were seen. For example, this Deccan trap question, for example, the oceanic currents question, or be it with respect to the rubber industry. There were some of these repeated questions which were present, but they were put in a different format, they were put in a different questioning sense, and they wanted a different kind of analysis of these questions. And when you look at the other aspects of the geography questions that were asked, this year the general trend is the proportion of geography in the paper has decently increased. It has gone up because it has been a general trend in the recent past. It might be with respect to the prelims or mains examination, the geography had taken a backseat so far. But again, in 2022 mains examination, you would see geography coming back directly or indirectly. For example, a question on cloudburst that was asked in GS3, again an extension of a geographical concept. Right? So, number of such multiple concepts, for example, the photochemical smog, although it is an environmental phenomena, it demanded a kind of geographical understanding in the sense that it dealt with the concept of temperature inversion. Right? So, with such understanding, the geography has made its comeback with a very, very strong footprint in the marking sense, and around like 100 and 110 marks were there from geography in GS1 itself directly. Right? Getting into the discussion, now we would just see that the questions, and we would also see the model structure that can be generally given for such an answer. Right? Moving forward, you would see in this particular you would see the question number 4 is a question of geography. Question number 5 is a question of geography. Question number 6 is a question of geography, and a question number 7 is also a question of geography. Now, when you look at these 10 markers, now they are asking about describe the characteristics and the type of primary rocks. That is part of the 4th question, which is again a core physical geography that is part of your geomorphology. Then moving on, discuss the meaning of color-coded weather warnings for cyclone-prone areas given by IMD. Now, the reason why they have gone for such a questioning is that in the recent past, there have been number of warnings that have been given, and various color coding was voraciously used, although the IMD uses it regularly, but this year there were great incidents of usage of such color coding. And in that context, that particular question is being asked, this is a mixture of disaster. Right? There is a mixture of disaster along with the geography. And we'll look at the next question, that is the 6th question. Discuss the natural resources potential of Deccan trap. Right? Again, I was talking about that there were number of questions that were repeated. And when you look at those number of questions being repeated, what you can see is that this Deccan trap is nothing but an extension of the Gondwana land question that was asked last year. In 2021, we would have seen that there was one particular question that was asked with respect to the Gondwana land. Although the India being part of Gondwana land, we have a minimal proportion of contribution to the industries, right, of mining to industries. That is what the question in 2021. If you are able to analyze that particular question and have a ready-made answer for such a kind of question, you could have tackled this question easily, for the reason that Deccan trap is nothing but the westernmost region, or the western part or the northwestern part of your Deccan region. That is nothing but the part of Gondwana land, right, which is one of the oldest physiography. As usual, we know that one particular trend that is observed in the geography questions is that you know that from the Indian physiography there is always one 10 marker that is consistently being asked. For example, in the last year's question again, there was one particular Indian physiographic question that was asked regarding the landslides, the comparison of landslides vis-a-vis the Western Ghats as well as the Himalayan belts, right? So, the favorite topic of UPSC, again sticking to it. Then examine the potential of wind energy in India and explain the resources for their limited spatial spread. As usual, again a question from energy resources. For example, in 2020 there was one question that was asked with respect to solar energy, right? That again, that is a very, very important section in the context of UPSC, right? Now, as we were discussing in Lakes Purana program, we had seen that these analysis of the previous year questions itself would give you a decent amount of the knowledge about what can be the anticipated areas and what are the hotspot areas with respect to the UPSC, right? And when you look at this, out of these 4 questions, I think at least 3 questions are directly from the hotspot area, and which have to be emphasized and which we have discussed elaborately in Lapse Purana with respect to that how we are supposed to go about with the notes making aspect of such a topics, right? Moving on further with respect to the answering part of each of this 10 marker, from once we finish 10 marker, we will get into the 15 marker part, right? Now looking at this question of, that is with respect to the 4th question. Now when you look at the 4th question, it is asking about describe the characteristic features or the characteristics and types of primary rock system. And when you look at the characteristics and types of primary rock system, we could have simply gone for the classification, that is nothing but the primary rock systems. And when you talk about the classification with respect to primary rock systems, we fundamentally know that these primary rock systems are nothing but asking about the igneous rock systems which are of volcanic origin. That could have been a simple introduction that could have been given for this question. Then moving on ahead with respect to this, now you know that these igneous rocks can be classified into 2. That is the intrusive rock systems, and apart from that we also have something called as extrusive rock systems. So one is with respect to the intrusive rock systems, the other one is the extrusive rock systems. The another kind of classification that can be extrapolated from such a classification is that we can talk about something called as plutonic rocks. We know that plutonic rocks are those rocks which are resultant of the solidification of the magma or lava beneath the earth's surface. It's a kind of endo kind of movement that is happening, endo kind of phenomena that is happening, and that is what is your plutonic rock. Then again, extrusive kind of systems, we see that we generally call them as volcanic rock systems. So such a kind of understanding can be given. Apart from that, we know that these extrusive can also be further classified. Into the basaltic and the granitic system. We know that the basaltic rock system is fundamentally resultant of a basic lava, and we know the fundamental characteristic of basic lava, it is having extensive amounts of the iron that is present, and is also with respect to high densities. Then moving on to the granitic kind of formations, we know that these granitic kind of formations are resultant of acidic lava, and the corresponding feature of the acidic lava, you would see it is fundamentally with respect to having greater extent of silicon composition with higher densities, right? Such a kind of understanding can be given. And when you look at the characteristic of primary rock, any characteristic of a primary rock would depend upon what? Would depend upon the density, would talk about the color, would talk about the crystalline nature or the amorphous structure, right? Such things can be understood, such things can be given. And apart from such a kind of understanding, we know that these primary rocks will also result in with respect to certain forms of metamorphic rocks, that is the secondary formations which is resultant. That can be one transitioning line that can be given as part of this question. Apart from that kind of transitioning, we could have simply concluded this particular question by writing that this primary rocks are nothing but the sources of information about the interiors of the earth. Because we know that for any source of information with respect to interiors of the earth, we know there are 2 fundamental things. One is the direct source, the other one is indirect source. And we can consider the volcanism to be one of the direct sources for the reason that there is an eruption of magma. Once you are able to decipher this kind of eruption of magma, once you are able to decipher the characteristic features of the magma, you would be able to understand what is the interiors, and it becomes an evidence for the different layers of the interiors of the earth that are present, and from which you can able to understand the endogenic movements that are generally classified as diastrophic movements and the sudden movements. That can be seen, right? It's a simple straightforward question, but one surprise element in this particular question is that suddenly a core geography question has appeared into the paper. For example, in 2020, there was again such a surprise element that was present. One core geography question that was asked, that was with respect to the circum-Pacific belt, the tectonic activity that is present around the circum-Pacific belt. That is a kind of question that was asked in 2020 also. That's again a core question from the geomorphology, right? Now, when we move to the next question, The next question is with respect to the discuss the meaning of color coded weather warnings for cyclone prone areas given by Indian Meteorological Department, given by IMD. Now it is talking about color coded weather warnings for cyclone prone given areas by IMD. Now fundamentally you know that any kind of early warning systems, because any of the disaster, you know that you fundamentally have four different or three different phases of any disaster. Once it is pre-disaster, one is during disaster, the next one is post-disaster. You need to fundamentally understand these different stages of disaster for the reason to manage it on a greater level and also to reduce the disaster risk. So in that context, when you look at the early warning systems that are followed generally for any kind of the disaster, you would see that that kind of early warning system generally comes into the pre-disaster stage. And there are different ways of ensuring the preparedness, that might be with respect to the information, that preparedness that might be with respect to infrastructure, that preparedness that might be with respect to the institutional presence. And in that context, they would have gone for this early warning system, and in that early warning system, this color coding is one mode of early warning system and keeping the awareness about the kind of disaster that is present. And in this context, you could have simply introduced by either defining the cyclone. This could have been the one simple introduction that could have been done. Apart from this, you could have also talked about that the significance of color codes. The significance of color codes to bring out the severity of the weather. That is, what is the significance of the color code that is generally observed, right? Then, in the transition, you could have simply said what are the prerequisite conditions, preconditions that are required for a cyclone to occur. Those prerequisite conditions that are required for a cyclone to occur. Now, when you look at those prerequisite conditions that are required for a cyclone to occur, you know that it is the sea surface temperature which has to be above 27 degrees. That is one aspect. Then apart from the sea surface temperature being above 27 degrees, you would also see that there is a Coriolis force, or there is presence of Coriolis force that is needed. Apart from that, there is also a low pressure condition that has to be created in order to result in the formation of the structure called cyclonic eye as well as the cyclonic wall. Once we talk about that kind of perception, once we talk about that kind of understanding in this context, apart from that, we also have to move to talk about the various aspects with respect to the tropical cyclones, because India is part of this is in tropical cyclone impact, right? Then from there you move on to the main body of the question, that you see that meaning of the color coded weather warning. They are talking about the meaning of the color coded weather warning. Now, when you look at the meaning of the color coded weather warning, we can talk about there are four different colors that are existing. One is with respect to the green color, the second one is with respect to yellow, the third one is orange, and the fourth one is the red color. And each color has its own meaning. Now, when you look at the green color, it fundamentally means that the weather is all well. Weather is all in manageable condition, right? There is no threat perception that is existing with respect to cyclone as a phenomena. Then, when we talk about the yellow, it fundamentally talks about being aware. That is the meaning of that kind of signal, being aware. And it talks about that be aware that yes, there can be a probability of cyclone. Then moving on further, orange or amber, that is, it talks about be prepared. It is not only about being aware, but it is also talking about the being prepared, for the reason that this is one kind of the penultimatum indication with respect to the severity of the cyclone that is going to exist, right? Then once we talk about orange, or orange indicating being prepared for the cyclone as a disaster, we also have red. And when you talk about the red, that fundamentally means it is a, you know that red is a symbol of danger. It talks about taking necessary action. And fundamentally that is talking about that, my dear, it is high time for the administration to look into the system. That is what is the understanding with respect to this kind of color coding, right? Suppose, if you were not aware about such a kind of information in the examination, because that is again a surprise element question that is present, because in the normal books or in the normal mainstream knowledge that you study, you would not have emphasized upon knowing upon the color code of the cyclone, because you would have emphasized upon what are the characteristic features of a tropical cyclone, what are the characteristic features of extratropical cyclone, or what is the difference between a tropical cyclone and a temperate cyclone, or what are the prerequisite conditions that are existing, what is the dynamics that is present with respect to the cyclones. That is, you would see the increasing number of cyclones in the Arabian Sea. but you would not have emphasized with respect to the color code. Now, in this context, one simple trick that you would have gone is going with the nature and the common sense that is present in this particular kind of question. You would have talked about that, that in general traffic light also you would have these kinds of lights, right? In the general traffic light also you would have these kinds of light. That is what is the general color coding, that is what is the general symbols that are indicated with respect to different variations. So with that anticipation, maybe you could have gone for that particular question, for the reason that you cannot afford to leave such questions, right? Then moving on, color code, it is fundamentally talking about what is the probability of occurrence. It is talking about what kind of impact that can be done, and it also indicates that what is going to be the risk. It is going to indicate what is going to be the risk, right? That is what is going to be present with respect to this. Then apart from that, you can simply conclude it by saying about how such kind of color coding or early warning systems can be utilized for disaster management. How such kind of early color coding or such kind of systems can be used for disaster management, for the reason that the Sendai framework, which was given in 2015 to a time period of 2030, it emphasizes on disaster risk reduction as a phenomenon. And in the disaster risk reduction as a phenomena, understanding the pre-disaster stage and early warning systems are very, very important aspect. So in that context, we can conclude this particular question with such a kind of understanding, right? Then moving on to the next question, that is with respect to the sixth question, which talks about the Deccan trap, right? Moving on to the next question. Yes, it is with respect to discuss the natural resources or the natural resource potential of Deccan trap. Now, the simplest understanding of this particular Deccan trap as a region could have been given as part of your introduction, because you know that when you look at this Deccan trap, the northwestern part of your peninsular region is what is considered as Deccan trap. This is what is the simplest understanding that could have been given with respect to the Deccan trap. And you know that fundamentally the peninsular region is all what? Peninsular region is volcanic origin. Peninsular region is volcanic origin. And you know that this volcanic origin, and when you look at the physiography of India, you would have studied about that, how this volcanic origin has arrived, right? And with the fundamental nature of this volcanic origin itself, you know that any region which is having this kind of volcanic origin, that you would see that it is all resource rich. It is all resource rich, for the reason that you would have seen that different kinds of depositions that are done in any of this context. Different kinds of deposition, and you know that cooling of magma, and you know that the dynamics that are present or the fluid mechanics that are present with respect to the magma could have been understood. And with that basis of understanding, what you would see is that it is resource rich in nature. That could have been a simple introduction with that. Then apart from that, you talk about what is the actual natural resource potential. Now here, please remember, my dear students, that you might think that this natural potential is only talking about the rock system, or is it only talking about the mineral system or mineral resources. Please remember, don't be in such a kind of apprehension. It is talking about the other aspects, for the reason that's why it said natural resource potential. And this natural resource potential would include your mineral resources, it would also include your precious stones, it would also include the soil resources, it would also include the flora and fauna that is existing. That has to be understood. That has to be understood, for the reason that under such exam pressure, what you would feel is that it is only talking about the mineral resources, for the reason that you know that any volcanic origin will have the mineral rich region, mineral resources. So in that context, you can talk about the ferrous and the non-ferrous minerals as one of the regions that are present with respect to these mineral resources. Apart from that, we can also talk about the precious stones. That is because you know that the magma is sourced from the mantle, and you would see the composition of the mantle, be it the upper mantle or the lower mantle. You would see these are composed of the olivines and pyroxenes. And because of these olivines and pyroxenes that are present, what fundamentally happens is you would see that there is going to be a precious nature of the stones after solidification of such composition is present, because we talk about these olive green stones, right? That is a kind of the precious stone resources that are present. Then apart from that, we also have the soil resources, that is your black soils. And you know that these black soils have the potential of growing cotton. And when you talk about these black soils, what happens? These are also called as regur soils. These are also called as self-aerating soils. These are also called as self-ploughing soil, for the reason that their ability to store moisture is of a greater extent. With such a kind of understanding, the soil resource is also one of the natural resource potential that is present. Then we talk about the flora and the fauna that is present in this region, right? Then moving on with a simple conclusion that can be given, because the question form is simply asking about discuss, right? Simply moving on further, we can say that such a kind of region or such a kind of natural resource potential, such a kind of natural resource potential that is present of such a region had enabled the Maharashtra to turn into one of the industrial states. That could have been one kind of applicative kind of conclusion that could have been given for such a question, right? Then moving on further to the last 10 marker that is present, the last 10 marker that is present with respect to the geography, that is examine the potential, examine the potential, examine the potential with respect to the wind energy. This is one part of the question. Examine the potential with respect to the wind energy in India and explain the reasons for the limited spatial spread. You know that you can't find this wind energy always, or you can't find this wind energy being present in all of the regions, for the reason that it has certain limitations for its spatial spread. That is what is the question asking about. Again, a straightforward question, and again you know that this question has fundamentally two parts in it. And you could have simply introduced with respect to this particular question, what is the status of the wind energy in the context of India. This could have been given, what is the status of the wind energy in this particular question, that is around 39 gigawatts. That is around 39 gigawatts. Because when you look at wind energy in India, we are also focusing upon the offshore wind energy. We are also focusing upon the offshore wind energy for the reason that we had come up with all this offshore wind policy, right, in the recent past. Then we also focus upon the hybrid nature of the wind energy, along with that mixed with the solar. That is another kind of the improvement or the another kind of upgradation that is generally done in the context of India's wind energy. Now moving on to the next part, examine the potential. It is asking about this, what is the potential of wind energy in India, right? And when you look at the potential of wind energy, we have to go for that, what kind of regions or characteristic features that are necessary for this wind energy to flourish. And when you look at this, what happens, you know that India Wind Atlas, which is provided by the National Institute of Wind Energy, NWE, talks about the wind energy potential. It talks about the wind energy potential, and around that potential is around 100 meters of height. At 100 meters of height, we have the potential of 300 gigawatts, which is of an immense energy, right, which is of an immense potential. And is this potential present in all of the regions? No, not necessarily. Because when you look at the top states that are present with respect to the wind potential, that is your Rajasthan, that is the Tamil Nadu, that is Gujarat, all these states are known to have great potential of wind energy. That has to be emphasized here. Then apart from that wind energy, we also talk about that the tropical region is known to have such a kind of wind energy, is known to have such a kind of wind potential. Apart from that, we talk about the land availability. We talk about the diversity that is present, because that's what I was discussing about the offshore wind energy that is present, right? So that is what is talking about the potential. Now here you could have simply drawn one kind of the map with respect to this wind energy, indicating the potential of the wind energy with, right? Now we could have simply gone that we could have talked about these particular regions are very, very well known or endowed with large potential of the wind energy. That could have been a simple kind of indication that can be given, because this adds to the +1 strategy that we generally discuss as part of Lapse Purana, right? Do you all remember that in Lapse Purana we discuss this kind of structure, that is with respect to what is going to be the structure of the question, what is going to be the content of the question, what is going to be the +1 strategy. Imbibing the same kind of understanding, here also we see that this +1 strategy is with respect to the question here is, you could have simply drawn the map. You could have simply drawn the map with respect to the distribution of energy, wind energy, right? Moving on to the second part of the question, the reasons for their limited spatial spread. And when we look at the reasons for the limited spatial spread, here you would see that there is varied wind potential, and don't we think that varied wind potential itself, would talk about this kind of the variation in the spatial spread? Yes, because you do not have the wind systems to be present everywhere in an equal proportion, for the reason that these wind systems will depend upon the inherent nature of the temperature, further corresponding variation in the pressure system. And you know that for any kind of wind system to originate, you know that there are three fundamental forces for any wind system to originate, right? One force is with respect to the pressure gradient force that we generally discuss in the class. Apart from that, we also talk about Coriolis force. The third kind of force that is needed for any wind system to originate, that is the frictive force. Right? So, it's an interplay of these different forces, and you would see with the inherent nature and the dominating force in such a kind of wind system is the pressure gradient force. And whatever is the nature of the pressure gradient force, that is going to determine the nature of the wind system, right? So, there is an inherent correlation that is existing with respect to the temperature as well as the pressure gradient force. So, with that fundamental understanding of the core concept of the wind system, you fundamentally will be able to know that there is a variation in the temperature occurring, and with that corresponding variation, there is a variation in the pressure also occurring. Right? So, varied potential. Apart from that, you would also have certain terrain difficulties, because for the reason, when you look at the installation cost that is involved, when you look at the maintenance cost that is involved with respect to any wind turbine, it is immense. It is immense. And you would see that for it to be supported, it demands an enabling element with respect to the terrain, because the installation is going to be very, very difficult, for the reason that it deals with heavy mechanical systems, right? Then moving on again, that is with respect to the technology intensive and the resource intensive, as this energy is all technology and resource intensive, because when you look at the design nature of the wind blades itself, you would see, or the wind vanes itself, it is of very, very different types. You would study 4 different kinds of wind vanes when you are understanding these energy systems, right? That is again technology intensive, that is again resource intensive. Then again, we would also have certain policy challenges. Policy challenges are the kind of incentives that are generally provided by the government system, right? This is what is the question directing towards. And you can simply conclude it by saying that what is the nature or the enabling sustainable source of energy. This enables a sustainable source of energy. That is what is the simplest understanding that can be done with respect to this particular question, right? Then moving on to the 15 markers that we were discussing. Now all this we finished 10 markers, question number 5, 6 and 7, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? Moving on to the next part, that is with respect to looking at the 15 markers that were asked in this question. One was, what are the forces that influence ocean currents? Describe their role in fishing industry of the world. I think if you would have seen this Lapse Purana video, we have already discussed this particular question as part of the previous year question. Right? In that particular question which we were discussing, it asked about what are the influencing factors with respect to the oceanic currents, and also it asked about what is its impact on the navigation, the regional climate and the fishing industries. But here in this question in 2022, UPSC asked only about the role in fishing industries. Right? That is one question that is asked. Then moving on to the next question with respect to this 15 markers, we also have the 15th question. Describe the distribution of rubber producing countries, indicating the major environmental issues faced by them. This is the second question of the 15 marker that is talking about the distribution of rubber. The distribution of rubber producing industry. Now again, the context can be with respect to the GM rubber that was produced in the northeastern states in the recent past. In that context, maybe if we have to extrapolate the nature of the questioning, we can talk about rubber as a resource and rubber as an equatorial asset that can be seen, right? And indicating the major environmental issues that are persisting with respect to the rubber as a resource. Then moving on to the 16th question, it is talking about mention the significance of straits and isthmus in the international trade. Mention the significance of straits and isthmus in the international trade. This is one aspect that it is talking about, right? That means here you fundamentally need to know that what is a strait and what is an isthmus. The simple understanding with respect to strait and an isthmus, the strait is that kind of narrow passage which is connecting two water bodies. That is what is the simplest understanding that we generally have. Then apart from that, we also have with respect to isthmus connecting the two land masses. Two land masses, that is what is the understanding that we generally have with respect to the straits and isthmus, right? Now, if you have to look at this particular question in the discussion part, you would see that the significance of straits and isthmus in the international trade. It is talking about the international trade. For such a kind of question, you could have simply talked about the introduction could have been, the introduction for such a question could have been that what is a strait, what is a strait and what is an isthmus. That could have been a simple introduction that can be given with respect to the 16th question, right? What is a strait and what is an isthmus? With that simple understanding, and if you want to still move ahead, you can just give one sort of difference that is existing with respect to straits and isthmus. Then from there you can talk about its significance. That means the significance of straits with respect to the international trade. Significance of straits with respect to the international trade. This is one particular aspect that you can discuss, and also the significance of isthmus in the context of international trade, right? Because for the reason that the straits and isthmus is going to have a large aspect with respect to connectivity, because we would have talked about different kinds of straits, straits of Malacca, straits of Makassar, Hormuz Strait, right? All these are very, very important in the context of the connectivity, and you know that these straits become very, very important for the reason they can be the choking points. They can be the choking points for the international trade. Apart from they being the choking points for the international trade, they can also act as a tools of diplomacy, tools of negotiation, tools of diplomacy, right? Because you would see the Strait of Malacca being very, very important around the major proportion of the global trade happening through this strait. Such kind of examples can be given. Then apart from that, when you talk about the isthmus, we can talk about this Panama isthmus that is present, and this fundamentally again promotes the nature of the trade, nature of the connectivity, right? Why in one ways you would talk about the connectivity with respect to the waterways. In the other one, with respect to the land nature or the land nature of the transport. The land nature of the transport, you can even talk about certain aspects like the transcontinental railways, right, or the transcontinental navigable ways, right? All these aspects can be discussed. All these aspects are going to be part of this particular answer, right? So this is again one applicative aspect. Here you have to see that it is including two aspects. It is fundamentally falling under the composite questioning, that you would see it is talking about the physical geography concepts as well as the economic geography concepts, considering the transportation as a phenomena. Considering the transportation of a phenomena being determined by the inherent nature of the land, of the physiography, of the nature of the topography, or the nature of the relief, or the nature of the landform adjustment or the arrangement that is present. That is being asked in this question. That has to be understood. You know that this flavor of question, that the composite flavor of the question is the favorite area with respect to UPSC. That has to be understood, right? Then moving on, looking at the next question, you would see that there is 17th question, which is again talking about the geography, that here you would see the troposphere is very significant atmospheric layer that determines weather process, that determines the weather processes. How? Right? Here it is fundamentally asking about the relation that is existing with respect to the troposphere and the weather conditions. The troposphere and the weather conditions, for the reason that this weather condition is going to impact the human life to a larger extent. This weather condition is going to impact the human life for a larger condition. That is what is the fundamental understanding. And when you look at the structure of the atmosphere, you know that there are different layers with respect to the structure of atmosphere, as we discussed in the class. That is with respect to your troposphere, stratosphere, mesosphere, exosphere, and as part of this exosphere, we include your thermosphere and ionosphere. That's what we discuss. And apart from that, when you look at this significance of each or significance of the structure of the atmosphere, we see that there are different characteristics that are present with respect to this structure. That is, with respect to your troposphere, you know, this is going to determine the climate. With respect to stratosphere, we know that it is going to have a specialized layer called the ozone layer, which is shielding the human life from the UV radiations. And mesosphere, we know that this is fundamentally applied for your satellite communications as well as your satellite positioning. And when you move on to the exosphere, especially the ionosphere, because of its ion presence, what happens is these are fundamentally used for the radio communications. Right? So all these aspects we generally discuss in the class. As an extrapolation of such a concept is this particular 17th question that is being asked. Troposphere is a very significant atmospheric layer that determines the weather process. Now in this question, we can simply talk about the introduction with respect to the troposphere. And we can talk about this troposphere and the fundamental characteristic of troposphere. We have something called as normal lapse rate, NLR. And the normal lapse rate, when we discuss about the normal lapse rate, we know that as the height is increasing, the temperature is decreasing. This is what is the fundamental phenomena that is existing. And you know that this is going to determine number of parameters for the consideration of a particular weather. And from here what happens is we know that how is this troposphere going to determine the weather conditions? How is this that determines the weather processes? How is this going to determine the weather condition? Here we know that the temperature as a phenomena is going to be varying. The temperature as a phenomena is going to be present and it is going to be varying. And when you look at this temperature as a phenomena, it is going to vary across the regions of the earth, and there is a latitudinal temperature zonation that is existing, as we generally discuss. And you know that there is something called as tropical belt, which is having a heat surplus. When you look at the temperate or the polar region, you know that there is a phenomenon of heat deficit that is present because of the restricted movement of the sun between the Tropic of the Cancer and Tropic of Capricorn. With that fundamental understanding, what happens is you would see that when there is a variation in the temperature, you know that there is automatic variation that is existing with respect to the pressure condition. That is what is the simplest understanding. And you would see that there is an inverse relation that is existing. As the temperature is increasing, the pressure is going to decrease. That means higher the temperature, lower the pressure, lower the temperature, higher the pressure. That is what is the relation we generally discuss. And you know that with such a kind of variation in the pressure system, one very, very important aspect of the weather, that is going to be your wind system, which is going to vary. And you know, as part of these wind systems, what happens is not only your primary circulations, but also secondary circulations are existing in the form of the local winds. The secondary circulations are existing in the form of local winds. Those also impact the weather that is restricted to a particular region. That is what is the understanding. Then apart from that, we also know that this temperature is not only going to impact with respect to the pressure, but it is also having an impact with respect to the phenomena of humidity that is present. That is the amount of moisture that is present in a particular region. The amount of moisture. And when you look at this amount of moisture that is present in a particular region, there is one particular relation that is existing between the temperature and the moisture holding capacity. And we know that the fundamental understanding of the temperature and the moisture holding capacity is that you would see that higher the temperature, higher the moisture holding capacity, lower the temperature, lower the moisture holding capacity. And when you look at this, how is it at all going to impact the weather phenomena, you would get to understand that this temperature and the moisture holding capacity is going to have a relation with respect to the phenomena of condensation. Further, the phenomena of precipitation is also going to be impacted. The precipitation is also going to be impacted. So what happens is when you look at this particular troposphere as a layer, it is going to determine, or it is going to be that kind of condition, it is going to be that layer of the atmosphere where you are having a varied phenomena that is existing or that is centered around the temperature. That is what is the question talking about. That it is asking about the weather processes. Weather processes which might be the wind system, it might be the condensation process, it might be the cloudiness, or it might be the cloudlessness that is generally seen in the subtropical region, or it might be with respect to the extent of precipitation or the extent of humidity that is seen. Right? Because any weather condition, you would see the simplest understanding of the weather with respect to, you see that it is such kind of characteristics which are localized and which are regional in nature. But whereas climate, you see that they are more permanent, they are more spread on a larger region. That is what is the fundamental difference between weather and a climate that is generally understood. That also has to be portrayed in this particular question. Right? Moving at this, you see this is what is the general relation it is asking about. Right? Once you are clear with these concepts of the temperature variation and the pressure and the temperature variation and the moisture holding capacity and the corresponding conditions for condensation and the corresponding conditions for the precipitation, such a question can be easily handled, right? Because this is one question which is enabling you to portray to the examiner that you have conceptual clarity. The concepts are very, very clear, because such questions are always present in the UPSC examination, where it demands you to show that what is the degree of conceptual clarity you are having. Such questions will actually add an enabling or actually add brownie points to your scores, right? Please understand, right? Now let's look at some of the things that we can discuss for your 14th question and 15th question. When you look at your 14th question and 15th question, let's look at it, right? Yeah. Now, when you look at the 14th or 15th question, yes, it is asking about what are the forces that influence the ocean currents. What are the forces that influence the ocean currents? This is one understanding they are asking about. And the second part of the question they are fundamentally talking about is what is the role in fishing industry? What is the role in fishing industry? So, when you look at this role in fishing industry and when you look at these forces, again I told you that this is a repeated question, my dear. Such a question was already asked in 2016, right? So, that's why your previous year questions becomes extremely important for you to understand, for you to analyze and for you to make the structure and for you to direct your notes making in such orientation. That's what we are doing in Lapse Purana, right? Now, when you look at this 14th question, you see that in the introduction, we can simply say what is an oceanic current. What is an oceanic current? What is the simplest understanding of oceanic current can be defined in this context of the first aspect. Now, once we talk about this first aspect, then we can straight away move on talking about that what are the factors that are responsible for such a kind of oceanic currents, because you know that fundamentally that oceanic currents is all about the balancing circulations. Just like the wind system which balances the pressure difference, which balances the temperature difference, that these oceanic currents are also, it is nothing but the balancing system with respect to the variation that is existing with respect to the salinity, temperature and density of an oceanic system. For the reason that when you look at the whole concept of geography, especially the physical or the conceptual geography, you would see that geography is all about balancing the imbalancing or balancing the imbalances. That phenomena you study in part of geography, right? How are the things balanced in the context of imbalances? That is what is your geography all about, right? It might be a wind system or it might be your oceanic currents, where you fundamentally discuss about your climatology and oceanography. It is all about balancing these imbalances, right? With such kind of understanding, you would see that these forces that are present with respect to your oceanic currents can be of two types. One is with respect to the what are the causative factors. What are the causative factors that are present with respect to these oceanic currents? Apart from this, what are the causative factors? We can also discuss about what are the modifying factors, right? So, we can structure these particular factors into two different kinds of structures or two different aspects. One is causative factor, the other one is modifying factor. Once we talk about this causative factor and once we talk about the modifying factors that are present with respect to this oceanic currents, we will see that the causative factor might be your wind system. The causative factor might be the STD relation that is existing across, that you know that there is a relation that is called the salinity, temperature and density relation, which is driving the movement of the oceanic currents. Then we can also talk about the Coriolis force, which is very, very important. For the reason you would see the role of the Coriolis force in the context of oceanic currents when you're discussing the gyre formation. Because you know that the gyres are formed, gyres are nothing but the cyclical kind of oceanic currents or the circulating oceanic currents. And when we look at these gyre formation in the context of the northern hemisphere or the southern hemisphere, you would see that these are in a varied direction. And that kind of variation in the direction is fundamentally due to the Coriolis force as a causative factor. When you look at the kind of gyre that is formed in the North Atlantic region, you would see that it is going to be a cyclical region. It is going to be the clockwise direction. Whereas when you look at the southern hemisphere, when you look at the South Atlantic, you would see there is an anti-clockwise. Because when you look at the northern hemisphere, you know the kinds of currents that you generally see is you have the north equatorial current, then we have the Gulf Stream, then we also have with respect to the NAD, the North Atlantic drift. Then apart from NAD, we also have something called as here the Labrador and the Canary. Then we also have this kind of circulation that is generally seen, which is fundamentally showing a clockwise direction in the northern hemisphere, right? Now we know that here Gulf Stream and Labrador are going to mix, which is going to, we are going to discuss in the part of, we are going to discuss as part of your the fishing industry. Right. Once we talk about these causative factors, we will also discuss about the modifying factors. And when you look at the modifying factors, it is nothing but it is fundamentally talking about the configuration. And when you look at this configuration, what happens is, you know that in the South American region, what you would see that there is a west wind drift which is moving. And when you see this west wind drift that is moving with respect to your South American region, you know that you will have the two different kinds of branches that are present. One is what is called as your Peruvian current or the Humboldt current, that which is divided. The other one is with respect to your Falkland current. And same kind of configuration influence you would see that is again with respect to the African region, that is generally seen with respect to this. What happens is here also African region also you would see this kind of influence where that this west wind drift due to the configuration of Africa is shifting or is resulting in a current called Venezuela current, which is again all these are cold currents. Right? So for configuration we talked about an example through Jair. For Coriolis Force, and for configuration we talked about your Peruvian current or Falkland current or Venezuela current resultant of west wind drift. This is one understanding. And also with respect to your wind system. And when you look at the seasonal fluctuations of the wind system, one particular oceanic current is very, very evident, and that is with respect to the Somalia current. See here what we are doing. We are not only giving the factors responsible for oceanic currents, we are also substantiating each of these factors through the existing examples, because such questions are straightforward. And what is going to add to your scoring with respect to these questions is what is the extent of substantiation you have done. With the corresponding nature of the substantiation, what is going to happen is you are going to get additional marks. That is very, very important, my dear. Please remember. Right? That is what we talk about the +1 strategy in Lapse Purana that we are generally doing upon. Right? So, the wind can be with respect to your Somalia current, right? Now, this can be your factors that are responsible. Then we have to talk about what is its role in the fishing industry, because this is what is the first part of the answer and this is what is the second part of the answer. And when I talk about this second part of the answer, what it is the role in fishing industry. And when you look at the role in fishing industry, one particular phenomena that generally arises due to these oceanic currents that are present, one particular phenomena we talk about is something called as upwelling as a phenomenon. And when you look at this upwelling, this is fundamentally resulting in a nutrient churning activity. And when you have this nutrient churning activity with respect to this upwelling as a phenomenon, automatically it becomes a conducive region for the fishing to flourish. Right? This is one aspect. The second aspect that can be seen with respect to your oceanic currents is again with respect to what, my dear, that is with respect to the mixing of warm and cold currents. This is the second dimension that can be discussed here. And when you look at this particular thing, that is mixing of warm plus cold currents, and when you look at this warm plus cold currents, what you would come across is that again this becomes a nourishing region with respect to your fishing industry. For example, Newfoundland. Apart from the Newfoundland, we also have with respect to your, during the near Japan region, the Kuroshio and Oishio, which are the warm current and cold current respectively, when they mix or when they club or when they join together or when they interact together, what happens is in the transitioning region, you would see that these are very, very conducive for fishing element. Right? Once you talk about this, there is another element that which has to be remembered. Generally the aspirants forget in this context is that it is not only the upwelling, it is not only the mixing, but it is talking about fishing industry, it is also the functioning of the ports. It is also functioning of the ports, for the reason that the fishing industry would flourish only when there is decent amount of trade that is allowed. Only when there is decent amount of trade that is allowed, and only when there is decent amount of the navigation that is provided. And when you look at this aspect, what happens is one particular concept that can be talked about is the North Atlantic drift. When you talk about this North Atlantic drift, what happens is you would see that this North Atlantic drift provides a conducive condition or keeps the ports of the United Kingdom in operation. And that will certainly result in the necessary trade, the necessary flourishment of the fishing industry. Right? This particular aspect has to be talked about, my dear, because we generally talk about only this, the aspirants. In the under pressure condition, you will be able to only recollect this mixture of your warm current and cold current. But you also have to talk about this upwelling as a phenomena. Apart from that, also this port functionality and the navigability aspect. And you can straightforward conclude it's saying that it has a decent amount of the economic significance and also corresponding impact on the regional climate. This is one understanding that can be given with respect to oceanic currents, right? Looking at the next question, looking at the next question, that is the 15th question, the last 10 marker of our point of discussion, because so far we have discussed with respect to question number 14, question number 16, question number 17. Now we are left with the last question of the geography, that is your 15 marker, that is the 5th question. And when you look at this 5th question, describe the distribution of rubber producing countries. Describe the distribution of the rubber producing countries and also indicate its major environmental issues. Right? Now that means it is indirectly showing that there has to be a development, there has to be a necessary measures that have to be taken to flourish rubber industry for the reason with a consideration or with an environmental consciousness. Right? That is what it's talking about. It is fundamentally talking about the sustainable rubber industry. That is what it is talking about. That is environmentally sustainable as well as the economically sustainable. That is what is the idea that can be seen in this question. And when we look at this particular question, it is talking about that you can simply introduce the characteristic features or the necessary conditions that are required for rubber to flourish, for rubber to be produced, right? And you know that rubber can be obtained from rubber tree, and rubber latex is generally used for raw material. That can be the simple introduction that can be talked about. Or you can simply say that it demands the tropical kind of climate. It demands the tropical kind of climate for rubber to flourish. And apart from that, that's the first part of the question, which is talking about the distribution of rubber producing industry. When we look at the distribution of rubber producing industry, we can see that major rubber producing industry or countries, we see Thailand to be dominating. Apart from that, Indonesia, apart from that, Vietnam, apart from Malaysia, you see that all of these regions are somewhere in this equatorial belt, somewhere in this between, within the tropical belt. That is there, and that is a fundamental reason why you know that for rubber to flourish, the tropical climate has to exist. Right? With such kind of understanding, with such kind of distribution, we can even talk about, this is with respect to the world distribution, we can even add that what is the distribution in the context of India. And when you look at the distribution in the context of India, you know that Kerala as a region is very, very well known with respect to such a kind of rubber production. Right? That is one fundamental understanding that can be talked about. So, whenever you are talking about the distribution has to be with respect to the what is the world distribution and what is the distribution in India. This is one very, very important aspect that has to be talked about whenever you are talking about the resource distribution. Right? Then when we look at the what are the environmental issues that are persisting. And when you look at the environmental issues that are persisting with respect to the rubber producing countries or major environmental issues faced by them, is that you would see, now please be very, very clear, distribution of rubber producing industries indicate the major environmental issues faced by them. And when you look at this, what happens is you would see that one very, very important thing that you would see is with respect to the water pollution that is resultant. The water pollution. Apart from this water pollution, you would also see the processing industries of the rubber to flourish, and you would see one particular concept called vulcanization of rubber. And when we talk about this vulcanization of rubber as a phenomena, what happens is in this vulcanization, there has to be a sulfur component that has to be promoted and there has to be a sulfide linkage that is present. And this process is highly polluting in nature. This process is highly polluting in nature. Apart from this, we can even talk about the existing impact with respect to the climate change, and you would see there is a feedback mechanism that is existing or that is being created, which is further aggravating this phenomena of climate change. Which is further aggravating this phenomena of climate change, right? And apart from that, you also know that not only the air pollution, not only the water pollution, but you would also have certain elements with respect to the soil pollution element, for the reason that once this rubber is vulcanized, and what happens is you would see that the degradation element of this rubber also is a questionable manner. It is a questionable form, right? Because what happens is the degradation, and for it to not to degrade very, very fast, we do this vulcanization process, right? And when we look at the disposal of such a kind of rubber, that becomes an issue with respect to the soil pollution, right? Then moving on, we can talk about, because they are asking about what are the issues, now it is very, very important for you to suggest. Now, one particular suggestion is with respect to the alternatives that can be used for the rubber. Apart from the alternatives that can be used for rubber, we can even talk about what is the sustainable rubber producing practices that are present. For example, hydraulic retention time, that is one particular concept that is generally used in such a kind of processing elements. Now, once we talk about this, we can safely conclude that we have to go for clean, green and sustainable production of rubber. Sustainable production of rubber, and we can just mention the GM rubber that has been recently in news that you would see. The GM rubber, the genetically modified rubber plants or the rubber plantation which was in use, right? So, this is what is the discussion regarding the geography questions that were asked as part of GS-1. You would see that there were 4 15 markers and there were 4 10 markers. That means on an average you would see that there are 100 marks which are from the geography, which is a very big proportion in this year's questioning pattern, right? Which is a very big proportions in this questioning pattern. That is what is to be understood here. The geography has made a significant comeback, right? And simply just an overview in just 1 minute, we will see that what are the elements that are to be included in a geography answer. As discussed in Lapse Purana, again I would like to repeat here, you would see that for any geography answer, one particular aspect that you need to remember is that you have to see the conceptual and clarity. You have to talk about what is the conceptual clarity that is demanded. The second thing that you need to discuss with respect to any kind of geography answer is with respect to what is its application. What is its application? Once you talk about this nature of the application that is present, we have to talk about fundamentally its application in the context of human and economic geography. Human and economic geography. Once you discuss about these application aspects, then one very important aspect is the pictorial representation of the concepts. Pictorial representation of the concepts. That pictorial representation of the concepts may be maps, maybe flowcharts, which we generally use, right? Which becomes very handy in this context of expressing the answer in the context of geography. Right? Please remember, my dear, whenever you are answering any geography question, as discussed in Purana, it is very important for you to show that conceptual clarity to the examiner. Conceptual clarity. And geography is a subject which demands high levels of conceptual clarity, as we always discuss in the class, right? That is with respect to this discussion. Thank you.